Denver's election day this week had the highest turnout since 1995 and set up a runoff election for many incumbents. Michael Hancock received 39% of the vote and will face Jamie Giellis, who drew 26% of the vote for mayor of Denver. 3 incumbent Denver City Council members, Mary Beth Susman, Albus Brooks, and Wayne New, also face runoffs, as do the 2 open seats in Districts 1 and 3. Patty, you called this one. You had it almost down to the percentage point, so well done. I think your kiss of death election predictions that have been made years ago in the show, that era is over. Now you are the prognosticator in charge. Where do you think the runoff's going to go?
Well, what we can see from the fact that it's not just the Hancock runoff, but also in those city councils, there was definitely an anti-incumbent vote. There was an anyone but I think what we have to look at is Hancock, who got 38% of the vote, which meant that more than 61% are anyone but Hancock, or his slogan, a city where everyone matters. Well, 61% think they don't matter in this city, and they voted for a variety of different candidates. I think if Jamie Giellis is really smart, she has been talking to Penn Tate and Lisa, and frankly, also Kaylin Heffernan, who really captured the spirit, if only 2% of the vote, of a lot of people in this city, and is talking to them about what can we do to really help people feel more engaged in this city, and is there a way we can kind of coalesce. I read Team of Rivals, that great book about when Lincoln set up his cabinet. We're not exactly in land of Lincoln here, but there are ways that you can pull together. I mean, Penn, who sat around this table, who is a font of wisdom, who would be so useful in a new administration. Lisa Calderon's energy, again, Kaylin's energy, I mean, she's inspirational in a lot of ways. If Jamie Giellis is able to bring some of these people to the table with her, it's good for the city, and it's also good for her because she's a relatively unknown quantity. She's worked with different neighborhood groups like Golden Triangle, the Rhino Arts District, but that would help define her for a lot of people who don't know much about her.
Michael, when I looked at the number of incumbents facing runoffs, it made me think that jobs and growth and economic success does not necessarily beget voter satisfaction. Clearly, there is at least in if we want to call it the primary vote side of these things, that there are some Denverites out there that are at least angry enough to have a protest vote. Maybe these incumbents all pull it off. I'm not saying they're all going to lose, but there's a mood out there. How do you look at the number of incumbents facing runoffs? What's your reaction?
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, you look at things are going pretty well. There is a boom in Denver and in Colorado in general, but some people get left behind in that. Some people don't like how neighborhoods changed, et cetera, and so you saw that discussed a lot. I think the turnout was interesting because 2 days before the election happened, it was the lowest turnout ever, and then it was the highest turnout that we got. And I think the thing we were talking about beforehand is, what is the runoff turnout going to look like? Is it going to be up? Is it going to be down because these incumbents are on? I think this is definitely a setback for Mayor Hancock, but it could be temporary. It could just be a little bit over a month here. Giellis, has to double her support, while Hancock only needs 11%. There are people that are dissatisfied, but you have to get 70% of those other votes if you're Giellis, and I think that's hard to do when Hancock's going to have money. I think you're right that Giellis has to get Tate's support, Calderon's support really quickly. They need to be proactive during this next month in order to galvanize that support. So I think it's going to be a close race. I think that turnout, grassroots support, who can get those last doors in, but I would definitely put my money on Hancock.
Eric, I've been of the belief that the 4 weeks, sometimes 5, between this first election in Denver city politics to the runoff election can really be an entirely different campaign. You can't really bring a whole lot from those first 4 months to these 4 weeks. And I look back at when Hancock won his first term, he faced Chris Romer. They were neck and neck. I think we talked about before the show. Romer's at 28%, or maybe 28%, 27%, and James McKee at 26%. So I can't remember which one was first place, but it was very tight. And then Hancock ran away with it in the runoff. You've been there. What is this runoff season like for these candidates?
The difference between that race and this race is, in that race it was an open seat. John Hickenlooper was going away. In fact, Bill Vidal was the acting mayor at that point. Here we have an incumbent, and that changes the dynamic. I've been part of one of those as well, and this reminds me somewhat of 1995, now a quarter century ago, and Mary DeGroat and Wellington Webb. yes, the race is about the incumbent, but I think the first round was more about the incumbent. And as Patty indicated, 62% of voters said anyone but. I think this race is in very large part about Jamie Giellis. I think it is about who Jamie Giellis is and who gets to define her. Does she get out to define herself, or does she let Hancock and all the Hancock forces define her? And trust me, they will do every effort, and it will start soon, and it will not be pretty to take the fight to her. One of the angles they'll run on is just lack of experience, and that one leaves me a little cold. I look around and say, she has as much experience as John Hickenlooper did when he became mayor back in '03. That seemed to work out reasonably well. Last I looked, he was running around Iowa and New Hampshire and whatever, and seeking the highest office in the land. This is a war about who Jamie Giellis is. Can she coalesce that other support? Can she grow that base? Can she define herself? I think everyone here expected a runoff, but all the conversation was whether Hancock goes into that runoff at 47, 48% in a very commanding position, per Michael's analysis, or whether Hancock goes into that runoff in the low 40s, 43, 44. No one, including, I believe, the Hancock forces, had a scenario in their mind where Hancock was going to enter this well under 40%. With that level of disconnect, this is a town open to change. The sale is on the table. The question is, can Jamie Giellis close the sale?
Megan, the Denver Post editorial page endorsed Michael Hancock in the initial campaign for the May 7th election day. Now that we're into a runoff campaign, I don't know how the Post approaches that, but how do you think it's going to differ from that initial six-way race now that's a two-person race?
I think we'll have to wait and see what happens through the campaign. You know, like Eric said, there's a campaign to be waged, and it'll be intense these next 4 weeks. And I think that for voters, they're going to have to weigh Jamie's credentials a little more than they did before before the runoff, right? I think it's going to be interesting to see where they come down on, because clearly voters are not happy. A sizable portion of the Denver population has said something is amiss. It's impossible to speculate what that is, but surely growth and development has played a huge role in some of that. And so how Jamie is able to position herself as something different than Hancock on that issue will be critical, especially because she does come from a background of working with developers and development and public growth. So how she's able to say, this is how I would be different than the current administration will be really key.
Mm-hmm.